Hello, and welcome to the second webinar in IUCN's Vital Sites series in the run-up to the World Conservation Congress. Today's webinar is focused on designing and managing protected and conserved areas to support inland water ecosystems and biodiversity. My name is Robin Abel, and I'll be the host of today's webinar. I work for the Nature Conservancy in the role of Durable Freshwater Protection Director. The Nature Conservancy is a co-host of today's webinar, along with IUCN's World Commission on Protected Areas, the IUCN Protected and Conserved Areas Team, WWF, the IUCN SSC Freshwater Conservation Committee, and Equilibrium Research. Our objective for this webinar is to raise your understanding of how protected and conserved area design, designation, and management can support the conservation of river, lake, and wetland biodiversity and associated social values. We're going to do this in two ways. First, we'll provide a high-level overview of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas' first technical report focused on inland waters, published in conjunction with COP16 last year. And secondly, by showcasing real-world case studies where inland waters are being conserved. And for those of you who might be less familiar with the term, inland waters refers here to rivers, lakes, and all other inland wetlands. Here's what our webinar is going to look like. We're first going to hear from Dr. Madhu Rao, who will set the stage for what follows. Next, we'll hear from two of the WCPA report's lead authors, Michelle Thiem and Tara Moberg. They're going to walk us through some of the report's key messages. After the report overview, we'll transition to our case studies, each presented by someone who's been directly involved with them. And you can see those case study presenters on the screen now. Following the case studies, we'll have time for what we expect will be a rich Q&A session. With that overview, I'd like to introduce Dr. Madhu Rao. Madhu is the chair of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, senior advisor of the Wildlife Conservation Society, and an adjunct associate professor at the National University of Singapore, with over 25 years of experience with designing and supporting the implementation of conservation field programs across Asia. Madhu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin, and welcome everyone. As chair of the World Commission on Protected Areas, I am really very pleased to invite you to this installment of the Vital Sites webinar series on the importance of area-based conservation measures to support inland water ecosystems and biodiversity. Freshwater habitats, including rivers, streams, lakes, and other wetlands, are among the most threatened ecosystems on our planet. Their biodiversity is declining far more rapidly than that of our oceans or forests, and needs to be urgently put on a track to recovery. Now, the protection and conservation of inland waters is important for three reasons. First, these systems are closely intertwined with human livelihoods and well-being. Second, inland water and terrestrial areas interact in a matrixed landscape. They're directly connected to coastal and marine systems. So as such, their effective conservation is critical to all three realms. And third, conservation of inland water systems is complex. Given the highly connected nature of inland waters, we need to look beyond individual protected or conserved areas to broader basin-wide approaches for effective and lasting results. It is very clear that rapid, scaled, and monitored investments in inland waters are necessary to bend the curve of biodiversity loss and meet the goals of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We hope that the Vital Sites webinar series can foster dialogue and discussion on technical needs and practical solutions towards strengthening inland water conservation. You have an exciting lineup of speakers, and I wish you all a very, very productive webinar. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Madhu, for those inspiring words. We're so grateful that you were able to kick off the session for us today. We're now going to move into the portion of our program where we'll share a bit about the IUCN WCPA technical report that I mentioned earlier and its key messages. We're going to be hearing first from Michelle Thiem and then from Tara Moberg. Thank you. Michelle is Vice President and Deputy Lead for WWF US's freshwater team. Over the course of her career, Michelle has focused on freshwater biodiversity conservation, protected and conserved areas for freshwater ecosystems, river conservation and connectivity, river-related infrastructure, dams, and planning, as well as evaluation of basin health. Tara Moberg is the Nature Conservancy's Global Durable Freshwater Protection Advisor. She was instrumental in leading a coalition of NGOs in advance of and during COP15, supporting the inclusion of inland waters in the 30 by 30 target. Tara is also the lead author of the WCPA report. And with that, I would like to invite Michelle to give your remarks.
Thank you so much, Robin. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It is a real pleasure to be here with you today. Next slide, please. Freshwater ecosystems cover a tiny proportion of the Earth's surface. Their estimates are around 1 to 2% of the Earth is covered with aquatic habitats, freshwater habitats. But they host a dazzling diversity of life. They are home to at least 12% of known species, a third of all vertebrates, and over half of all fish species. Think how vast the ocean is and how tiny freshwater is, but we in the freshwater realm host more than half of all fish species. And new species are being described every year. Next slide, please. However, unfortunately, we are also in the midst of a biodiversity crisis. Overall, we're seeing biodiversity on average in terms of species population since 1970 decline by 73%. And why is that? It is driven by the crisis in freshwater species populations who have declined by on average 85% since 1970. So it's clear, if we're going to reverse the decline overall in biodiversity, we have to focus on freshwater systems and the needs of species. Clearly, urgent action is needed. Next slide, please. So the good news is that that in the Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity, there is an explicit inclusion now that 30% of inland waters must be covered by protected areas. And we know that that is one of the urgent actions that are needed for freshwater species and biodiversity. Tara and I are going to give a very whirlwind tour today of the report that Robin and Madhu spoke about. And this report will cover guidance not just on the what, which is this first question, but the where, the how, and while ensuring other important aspects of freshwater conservation are considered and included. Next slide, please. I ask you now to each come up with, in your mind, a number of how much of the globe you think is covered in terms of inland waters by protected and conserved areas. What does that coverage look like currently? Next slide, please. The report presents an updated method and baseline results that can be tracked over time to answer that question. And we found overall that it's about 16% coverage currently. But there's a lot of variation across regions, across different ecosystem types. And this graph shows just the results for rivers. And you can see that some of the types, so the smallest headwater and intermittent streams, are really well covered. We've already met over 30% of our goal globally, but others, like very large rivers, less than 5%. And that's really critical as we're thinking about how to design and set up protected area systems to make sure that we're representing all different ecosystem types. So the bottom line is that we have a long way to go to reach that 30% and representation across all types. Next slide, please. So I've made the case that we need to increase focus on protected and conserved areas for inland waters. But what is unique about that? Some would say that terrestrial protected and conserved areas can and do fully cover the needs of freshwater systems. And that is true to some extent, but certainly not fully. Next slide, please. We know that the integrity of inland waters relies on 5 distinct components of health. And the design, designation, and management of protected and conserved areas that are intended to protect inland waters must consider the needs across all 5 of these components. Next slide, please. Also unique to inland waters is the importance of the basin context. While the freshwater focal areas capture areas of high conservation value in a basin, like shown on this graph or graphic on the bottom left, these are areas that say of high endemism or unique habitat types. We must also consider what's happening in the critical management zones and the upstream and downstream catchment management zones, as those are going to be critically important for the health of the systems in the focal areas. Next slide, please. In the report, we present 4 key questions that can help assess whether and how protected and conserved areas are an appropriate intervention for inland waters conservation. So the first question is, what are the values or objectives that we're trying to achieve, and who are the vested parties? Second is around what key ecological attributes are critical for those objectives, and are they under threat from activities either within the proposed area or upstream? The third is, can protected and conserved area design, designation, or management be used to reduce those pressures, and if so, how? And finally, are there opportunities to work with others in the catchment to address those external threats? Next slide, please. So now I'm going to walk you through a hypothetical example that steps through those 4 questions. For the first question, we're trying to set up a new area that is intended to protect a hippo population. And we know that that population requires a river depth of 1.5 to 2 meters, and that there are potential water withdrawals happening in the upstream area that are planned. So if we want this area to protect the hippo population, we know that the protected area needs to be designed in a way that it has a water reserve or environmental flows required as part of its design and management to keep that population viable. And to address question 4, we would want to engage with stakeholders within the basin to see if there might be alternative options for the water that they need, or if they could use different types of crops that use less water, or if they could withdraw the water at a time of year where the population of hippos is not so sensitive to those water withdrawals. Next slide, please. The report also has a very large focus on human rights, equity, and inclusion. And we make the case that communities need to be at the center and at the starting point for all discussions about potential or existing protected and conserved areas and their management. Access to fresh water is a basic human right, but we know that those water rights vary extensively across large regions, across countries, even within countries. And this is not only about established legal water rights, but also about community rights under Indigenous or traditional law. And these go beyond the use of water for economic or human consumption purposes to often include cultural, religious, subsistence dimensions, and those also need to be considered and given precedence. Next slide, please. I'm going to end with an example from part of the Amazon in Ecuador, where a community fluvial reserve has been put in place. This began when indigenous communities and the Nature Conservancy became interested in scoping a conservation area in the region because there were threats from mining, from deforestation and pollution. A process was kicked off that used the free, prior, and informed consent approach with 80 communities within the region. And it was a multi-year process. It was set up in a way that communications were multi-channel and that simultaneous translation was used. There were many community meetings. It happened over a long period of time to give the time necessary to hear all of the voices and bring them to the table. In the end, all 80 communities have consented to setting up this fluvial reserve as a community-led conservation area, which protects or covers over 1,800 kilometers of river and 26,000 hectares of wetlands. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Tara, who will lead us through the second half of the report. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you to all of you from all over the world who are joining us today. I am just so inspired looking at the chat and seeing where you're coming from, what you're contributing, the resources that have already been shared today. Michelle gave us a really strong overview of the first 3 chapters of the report, so a focus on the global protection status of inland water ecosystems, the biodiversity status, and just pointing to the critical loss of inland water ecosystems and biodiversity in the last 50 years, as well as rounding out her presentation with the importance of starting with human rights, equity, and inclusion that's covered in Chapter 3 of the report. Building from that foundation, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes. And as Michelle said, this is really a whirlwind tour, but just to introduce you to the latter half of the report, chapters 4, 5, and 6, which focus on designing, designating, managing, and financing protected and conserved areas for inland water conservation objectives. Next, please. So we'll start with chapter 4, and with each chapter, we'll put in the chat a link to that specific starting page of the chapter and invite you to scroll along with us as we move through the high-level principles and frameworks that are included in the chapter. So you can see the types of tools and data sets that are offered to support the high-level principles. Starting with 7 principles for integrating inland waters into the protected area network, I want to share that the approach to this report and starting with these principles really was not to create something new, rather to crosswalk existing resources, science, expertise, experience for freshwater conservation to the frameworks that exist for terrestrial marine protected and conserved areas, as was shared by Madhu and Michelle earlier, to really take advantage of this opportunity to better integrate inland waters into the ambition to achieve a 30% of connected and effective management of conserved areas by 2030. We know, oh, sorry, back please. Sorry about that. We know that inland waters are great connectors, and it's illustrated by this beautiful photograph of Katmai National Park and the Brooks River flowing through the park, and that by connecting our work across marine, terrestrial, and freshwater realms will only result in strengthening the overall protected and conserved area network. Just touching on 2 of the 7 principles, first I'll share that there's a principle of durability and effectiveness that links to an assessment of your national legal framework or regional legal framework for conservation. We found that many times protected and conserved area laws, the national protected and conserved area laws, do not include explicit freshwater protections, and maybe those are protected in a set of water laws. And so really looking at the gaps in the legal framework in the country and the opportunity to fill those gaps. It's also important to include inland waters data sets, so ecosystem types, freshwater biodiversity in the conservation planning process. And this section of the report includes resources and data sets that can support you in doing that if locally available data aren't readily available. Next, please. Moving down from really thinking about the network as a whole to site-specific design, once you've identified those places that are important and where a conservation area-based approach might be appropriate, and the values of those sites, it's important to ensure that the design and the geographic boundaries are defined with sufficient size and configuration, recognizing that the needs of complex of vernal pools will be different from a large lake, and again, different from a riverine ecosystem. It's also important to ensure that you're including the banks, bed, surface, and groundwater bodies in the definition of the delineated areas, not to assume their inclusion by describing the land base. Lastly, back to the example that Michelle shared, while in some places there'll be the opportunity to include a full catchment or part of a catchment within your geographic boundaries, where that isn't possible or feasible or necessary, it's at a minimum important to include riparian areas and floodplain buffers within the geographic boundaries. And we can see an illustration in the images to the left of the potential consequences of using rivers as boundaries to a national park. This is a national park in Latin America. Next, please. So we know geographic boundaries are static, and in freshwater ecosystems and inland waters are dynamic. And so in order to complement the geographic boundaries that are static with the dynamism that Michelle mentioned, the key ecological attributes, including connectivity, water quality, environmental flows, it's important to consider the role of environmental standards for your protected areas, ideally at the outset so that these standards can be included in the legal designation. But this is also a tool that can be used in the management planning phase. Approaches range at a high level from a narrative approach, and there are two examples to the left. One that is specific to inland water ecosystems that embeds the provision of environmental flows, aquatic connectivity, and water quality to support aquatic life and ecosystem services into the legal definition. A second that is more general but inclusive of inland water ecosystems. This example articulates the protection of habitat conservation as well as natural ecological processes. And while it doesn't call out environmental flows and aquatic connectivity, by having that broader definition that goes beyond description of land or description of vegetative habitat, which we often see in protected area laws, it has a more inclusive umbrella to consider freshwater ecosystems within that language and those designation provisions. On the other end of the scale would be site-specific approaches. And so building from the example that Michelle walked through a little bit earlier with our hippo population, a site-specific approach could be tailored to maintain the minimum depth levels. That minimum depth could be translated to a site-specific environmental flow standard. Next, please. So building from the places that in chapter 4 and the priorities that have been identified to strengthen and expand the network, chapter 5 is really an overview of an array of designation and government mechanisms that can be tailored to those conservation objectives for the sites that you've identified. Thank you, Yen, for popping the link to chapter 5 in the chat. So thanks to the governments, many people who I've seen on this call today, civil society, indigenous communities, we have been able to share with you in this report more than 40 case studies that cover inland water areas with a range of designations, including protected areas in all 6 IUCN categories, other effective area-based conservation measures, and we'll hear about a fantastic example from Colombia later today from Fernando, and indigenous protected areas and territories, which we heard an example of earlier. There are also designations, international designations, including Ramsar sites, biosphere reserves, and World Heritage sites, which have made important contributions to inland water area-based protections and conservation. Next, please. I want to highlight some emerging mechanisms, many of which are innovations that have been developed just in the last few years, really tailored to inland water ecosystems. The first is the use of sacred and cultural areas, as well as rights of nature to conserve freshwater ecosystems. An example is the Krupa River in Croatia, where they used a cultural heritage designation for the first time on a freshwater ecosystem for the Krupa River itself. And it includes in its designation the river as well as the area, as you can see in this image, up to the ridge tops. So just to highlight that all these cases that I'll just give the tiniest snapshot to are included more in report, and happy to share more resources related to them. Another area that is just really exciting to see, or there are a lot of innovations happening, is around riverine focused protections. And Ulrika will share an example a little bit later today, as will others. But here, these are protections that really focus on maintaining the connectivity, flow, and water quality of these systems. One example is the U.S. Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the National System of Protected Rivers that are linked to the act. And that act protects the flow, the connectivity, as well as a floodplain corridor, which is dependent on whether it's designated as a wild, a scenic, or a recreational river. Moving to our nature-based solutions for water and climate, while this tool as a conservation tool isn't new, what is becoming newer is using it as a complementary tool for biodiversity conservation. So really looking at where we can use these measures in places that both provide solutions for water provisioning and climate mitigation and regulation, as well as delivering and bending the curve for biodiversity. A really exciting example out of Vermont just in the last couple of years is the Flood Safety Act, where the act takes a basin scale approach to planning, and then embedded in that act, there is the conservation of river corridors, more than 5,500 miles of river corridors, and about 60,000 hectares of floodplain area to reduce the development in those areas and the risk of flood safety damage and costs. Next, please. I saw Pia join a little bit earlier, and just a huge shout out to the Pew team and the local civil society organizations that led this next example that I'll share. But there's a lot of innovations that's coming out as well around geographically defined environmental flow protections. The one that I'll share a quick snapshot on is the Puelo and Futaleufú rivers, where Chile is designated a water flow reserve in those rivers in perpetuity to support both the ecosystem health and biodiversity of the river, as well as the thriving ecotourism in those regions. And that provision will ensure that moving forward into the future, those rivers aren't developed for water diversions and hydropower, which has been a threat in the past. Another example is community fish reserves, and we'll hear more from our colleagues in just a bit on Lake Tanganyika, so I won't go too deeply on that. Just to share that there have been examples around the world that have demonstrated the improved benefits to biodiversity and conservation from locally managed community fisheries. And lastly, I'll just note some emerging examples in groundwater supported ecosystem protections and the innovations in connecting the surface water to groundwater, abundance, quality, and connectivity in order to sustain the processes that are necessary for those ecosystems to thrive. Next, please. Moving to our final chapter, chapter 6. I don't know if you realize this, but we've covered about 40 pages in 5 minutes. So congratulations. Thanks for hanging with us. The link to this chapter is dropped in the text, but this chapter is really focused on the management aspect of things. So moving from planning and designation, really thinking about the management of the protected and conserved area network, and just noting that thinking about the existing network is covering 16% of the planet right now. There's a huge opportunity in existing protected and conserved areas to integrate inland water conservation, as well as in the new areas. So this chapter really focuses on how to integrate inland waters considerations into protected and conserved area management plans. It includes the typical outline of a management plan and crosswalks resources that might be helpful in embedding inland waters into the structure of a conventional protected area management plan. Foundationally of this is including inland water objectives in the outcomes and indicators to track how successful we are in conserving the areas aligned with those objectives. It also includes the consideration of interventions with more than 50 activities that are outlined that could be taken within a protected area itself, within the critical management zones that Michelle shared in the landscape, the watershed slides, as well as in the broader catchment, recognizing that while interventions in the protected area will be important, there will also be activities upstream or in the watershed that are important to be aware of and participate in order to ensure your conservation objectives of the protected area are met. Next, please. Lastly, I would touch on the importance of including budgeting and financing in the planning and management of the protected area reserve, protected and conserved area network. You'll see that in this section of the report, the budgeting categories and sustainable financing tools, again, they look similar, not dissimilar to terrestrial and marine protected areas. But the things that you might think about that are unique include the types of personnel that you might need, the types of expertise, a hydrologist, a freshwater ecologist, as well as the types of studies for pre-designation and designation, baseline studies to understand what the biodiversity is within existing protected areas, or baseline studies for understanding the extent of the freshwater ecosystems moving from spatial data to actual ground truthing. It also includes sustainable financing tools, and one of which we'll close with is debt conversion, which is a conservation trust fund kind of led mechanism in Mongolia, a protected project for finance permanence project that was just completed last year. It's about to celebrate its 1-year anniversary next month. The project is called Eternal Mongolia and raised $200 million to support conservation activities to expand the protected area network in Mongolia, to improve its effective management, and to support nomadic lifestyles, especially in the buffer areas and corridors between the protected areas. And this was the first tool like this to include both terrestrial and freshwater outcomes within the conservation objectives of the financing tool. So with that, I will close just by saying thank you again. We know that was a lot in a very short amount of time, and I just welcome your feedback and conversation moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both Michelle and Tara for those fantastic presentations. We have time for maybe one question right now, and do know that we will be revisiting all of the questions later in our much longer Q&A session, and we'll also be responding to some of them in writing as we go. So we have time for one question. Maybe I'll ask, I think either of you would be equipped to answer this, but I'll ask Michelle. This is related to the graph that you showed of river and stream coverage of protected and conserved areas. And the question is, did the study delve into why the smallest streams seem to be better protected than larger streams?
Yes, thank you, Robin, and great question. We didn't go into that in this particular study. It's one that we've speculated on potential answers to, and probably, I mean, a good guess, but it would be great to do more detailed studies looking at it, is that we know that protected areas are often put in higher elevation areas in remote places where smaller streams are born. And so it's not that surprising to see a higher percentage. It's also where large rivers are, is where human development often is concentrated. So it's not an unexpected result in many ways, but we didn't dive into it in particular in this study.
Thank you, Michelle. And please keep your questions coming in the Q&A. Now, though, we're going to move on to the next part of our program, which I'm so excited about. We're going to hear about some real-world case studies. So our first speaker who's going to join us is Ulrika Aberg. She's going to be speaking about the Vjosa River in Albania. Ulrika is a senior program officer with the Protected and Conserved Areas team at IUCN. She's currently leading IUCN's work related to the protection of the Vjosa River system in Greece and Albania. She's also implementing the IUCN Green List standard for fair and effective protected and conserved areas with strong linkages to IUCN's World Heritage work, as well as running participatory 3D modeling exercises. Ulrika, please join us.
Thank you so much, Robin, and hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm really so happy to see so many of you here today, and so many interested in this topic. So today, as Robin introduced, I will be talking about the AOS Vjosa River system. Next slide, please. This is a transboundary river located in southeastern Europe. It's called Aos in Greece and Vjosa in Albania. So it's flowing northwards from the Pindus Mountains in northern Greece to the Adriatic Sea in southern Albania, so part of the Mediterranean. The main stem of the river has a total length of about 272 kilometers, of which 2/3 are in Albania. So in 2023, the Vjosa River in Albania and 3 major tributaries, so the Drino and tributary to the Drino called Kardic, the Bancha and the Shushitsa, were declared Category 2 National Park. And what is so special with this site is that it is the river that is the heart of the protected area. The river is not a boundary, it's not a terrestrial protected area with a river inside, but it's the protected area that it's the river, and the river is the protected area. So its design includes the active morphological channel and the active floodplain, as well as the erosional slopes up to the tops of canyons. But it is also really well connected with other protected areas in the catchment. Next, please. So Vjosa is one of the most magnificent fluvial and riparian ecosystems in the Balkans, with a huge abundance of flora and fauna. So one of the most epic migrations taking place in the animal kingdom is that of the European eel. After swimming over 10,000 kilometers across the Atlantic from the Sargasso Sea, it finds its way to the Vjosa River and swims upstream to spawn there. In the river, there are also several other several endemic species, such as the Ochotid spined loach, Prespa barbel, the Albanian water frog, and several species of mollusks, insects, and plants. The Vjosa Basin is the last stronghold of the critically endangered Egyptian vultures. And in the delta, we can find many other majestic bird species, such as the Dalmatian pelicans and the greater flamingos. Mammals like the Eurasian otter and long-finger bats can also be found along the banks of the river, and in the wider catchment, we find the critically endangered Balkan lynx. And next slide, please. So the Vjosa River is largely a natural system driven by natural processes. However, in the past, there was a huge threat from hydropower. Still today, there are many competing resource uses, including water abstraction from agriculture, industry, drinking water, also hydropower on tributaries, as well as gravel extraction, fisheries, and aquaculture. There is some pollution from agriculture and aquaculture, untreated water, and solid waste. But potentially the biggest threat comes from mass tourism development, and especially in the Delta area, including construction of an airport, a new port, and other infrastructure and tourist facilities like hotels, resorts, etc. And together with a weakened protected area legislation, we are seeing some worrying developments that we hope we will be able to deal with in the future. Next, please. In terms of the governance, I will just speak about this very quickly because the Vjosa National Park is governed by the government, and at least previously under the National Agency for Protected Areas. So the idea was to set up a protected area authority managing the national park with a foundation with a wider scope of the valley, including the nominated Vjosa Biosphere Reserve. However, with the amendment of the law, there has been some changes to the protected area management in Albania, and there is now a new administration office being established that will kind of replace the protected area authority. So the governance system is still therefore being under development. And the last slide, please. So local communities have played a really crucial role in advocating for the river's protection and campaigning for this for over a decade. And during this work on establishing the national park, we worked really closely with NGOs who have been instrumental in facilitating community engagement and information sharing, consultations, and awareness raising. And there are still now ongoing efforts focusing on promoting, developing, and supporting local economic opportunities through sustainable community tourism. So that was just a very quick overview of our work on the Vjosa River system, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ulrika, for that fantastic presentation. And yes, we will have time after all of our case study presentations for a Q&A session. So please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of them as possible. Next, our next speaker is going to be Fridolin Nzambimana. He's going to be speaking about Lake Tanganyika. So Fridolin is a program manager at the Nature Conservancy, overseeing the Lake Tanganyika program across Tanzania, Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burundi. This program aims to protect at least 30% of freshwater key biodiversity areas by June 2030. That covers approximately 41,000 hectares, while enhancing fisheries and supporting local economic development for 100,000 fishers. Ferdinand, please.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to talk about the work that we are doing across the 4 nations. So I am going to talk about the designing and management process of freshwater community and conserved areas in one of the world's most intact lake in the world, by providing a case of Kipiri Archipelago, referred to as 7 islands. Next, please. The transboundary Lake Tanganyika is the world's 2nd largest freshwater ecosystem by volume, and holding 17% of world's freshwater, with more than 250 species of cichlids habitats, with 98% of endemism. This lake cut across 4 countries, and 29 key biodiversity areas have been mapped across that ecosystem. Apart from being a global hotspot of biodiversity, Lake Tanganyika is a lifeline for 12 million people living around it, and divided across 22 local tribes. Next, please. In terms of main threats, some have been identified and still some are under development. But the most threat that the lake is facing is low awareness around consequences of illegal, unreported, and unregulated and sustainable fishing practices, declining population of fish and endemic mollusks due to lake warming, limited fisheries and critical habitats data, specifically for rare and range-restricted cichlid populations, limited sustainable financing mechanism for resource protection, limited legal recognition and protection of critical habitats, and inadequate skills, access to technology and tools for monitoring and control. Next. What we do to establish freshwater and community protected and conserved areas, specifically in Kipiri, is divided into 3 major steps. The first one is scoping and engagement. We started by looking at the provision of national, legal, and regulatory frameworks and institutional setup that could allow for freshwater community protected and conserved areas. We moved forward to stakeholder engagement, and then conducted feasibility and design, and then we went ahead and start implementation. Next. One of the key component of this process is supporting communities with delineation and demarcation of community protected and conserved areas. This phase is divided into 7 steps, and it's absolutely the most critical phase of getting that done. The first step is supporting community develop sketch maps to understand land and water use patterns in proposed community protected areas. The second step is to conduct consultative meetings with fisheries management institutions to verify and validate maps of proposed community protected areas. And then after holding those consultative meetings at management institution level, we move to public meetings with all villages to provide a platform for all community members to have the say in how and where we designate those areas. The 4th step is about facilitating consultative meetings between community members and local government authorities. When we have the consensus at that level, we move ahead and start collecting and verifying GPS points for social and biodiversity features. And then we convert the sketch maps into shape files. The last step, which is that we completed last year, is to develop management and protection instruments including legal recognition by regional and national authorities. In terms of lessons, next please. In terms of lessons that you have learned, is because we do this mapping, community mapping exercise in villages that are coastal to the lake, is how do we consider neighboring community protected and conserved areas in terms of equity and opportunity cost. And the question that mostly we focus on is what activities can be done near fish breeding sites or fish breeding areas that is fair for the adjacent communities. And the second lesson that you have learned is at the end of the day, a key point is how to incorporate suggestions from each of these levels in consultation documents. Because when we are doing community engagements and stakeholder engagement, we do that across different levels. And for each step at each stage, we need to make sure that all suggestions are incorporated to have one agreed upon map that for which we can develop management and protection instruments. The map that you see at the right is the network of community protected and conserved areas that have been delineated and designated in Kipiri, in the 7 islands of Kipiri, where the area under protection now for over the 9,884 hectares of that overall critical habitats around the 7 islands of Kipiri, more than 5,000 hectares are now under protection, and more than 9,000 hectares are under community management. That's all in a nutshell that I can say about the work that we are doing in Lake Tanganyika. And thank you.
Thank you. That's just really exciting to hear about that work, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. So we're going to move on to our last speaker of today. Our last speaker is Fernando Trujillo, and he's going to be speaking about the Bita River in Colombia. So Fernando wears many hats. He is the scientific director of Fundación Omacha. He is a corresponding member of the Colombian Academy of Sciences, a National Geographic explorer, a member of the cetacean, manatee, and otter IUCN species specialist groups, a member of the science panel of the Amazon, chair of the subcommittee of small cetaceans of the International Whaling Commission, and a member of the Protected Areas Commission of the Colombian Academy of Sciences. Welcome, Fernando.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here today with all these people from different countries in the planet, very concerned with the island waters. Today, I'm going to talk in behalf of so many institutions working in the Bita River. That is a Ramsar and is a OEMC site. Next, please. Well, the Bita River is part of the Orinoco River Basin. The Orinoco is a large region of about 1 million square kilometers and is shared by Venezuela and Colombia. The Bita River itself is a long river, a large river crossing the llanos of Colombia in the northeast, and it's about 520 kilometers of length. And the whole Ramsar site is about 824,000 hectares, and is feeding for a lot of small tributaries. This is basically a savanna landscape with riparian forests. Next, please. Well, regarding the biodiversity of this river, we have at least 63 different mammal species, more than 200 birds, 38 reptiles, 19 amphibians, and 254 fish, 11 crustaceans, 87 macroinvertebrates, 34 coprophagous beetles, and 3 freshwater sponges. And that was a discovery for us. Even 1 or 2 of them are new for science in freshwater in the Orinoco. Next one. And regarding key freshwater species, the Vita River is the home of the endangered river dolphin, the Amazon river dolphins, also the giant otters, jaguars, tapirs, the sea pig, this a fish, also stingrays, turtles, and even manatees are present in the Vita River. Next one. Well, this river is very particular for us because the government had a lot of initiatives to develop this area as the El Cerrado in Brazil, because they thought that was an unproductive savannas and they wanted to produce a large agro-industrial development. So we needed to prove that these savannas were productive from the point of view of biodiversity. So we found different kind of threats like ecosystem transformation, the land use change, because a lot of forestry companies just moved to that area. We have a large fires. Just to give you an example, 3 years ago, we lost 200,000 hectares by fire. Now it's recovering, but we are trying to handle these large fires in the Vita River. There are a lot of hunting and biodiversity laws and bad fishing practices. So there is a very low institutional presence in the area. It's a geographical isolation because the only way to go to this area is by plane. Sometimes 3 months a year you can go by road, but in general it's very isolated. And we are in a border zone with Colombia and Venezuela. Next one. Regarding mechanism protection, well, we try to create this figure of protect river, but in our legislation in Colombia didn't exist. So we were looking for a figure that really considered the water, the inland water. So our best chance was the Ramsar sites, because recognized local governance. And also 2 years ago, we designed this area as an OEMC. So we are working how to enhance this governance, local governance, the citizen governance. So we create a regional wetlands committee with the representation of all the actors in the area. We have a watershed council, and Omacha Foundation is the president of this council. We are promoting conservation agreements with all the people living there. And we are doing with a lot of organizations like TNC and WWF programs for fire management. Regarding the fishery management plan for fish, we are promoting fishery agreements, and we are working together with the government, the fishery authorities. It's called the AUNAP, and we are collecting data with fishery monitoring being doing for the local communities. And also regarding the sustainable use, we have sustainable tourist projects in the area. We are doing participatory wildlife monitoring with camera traps, especially in many of the areas around the Vita, silvopastoral pilots and sustainable cattle ranching arrangements. And also we had some problems with jaguars and cattle. So we have like 10 or 12 different farms when we are implementing anti-predation measures, and they are working. So they are coexisting with jaguars in this area. And now, during these days, we are signing new implementations of 40 new agreements as a part of the GEF program in the Orinoco. So we are working as well with a lot of environmental education and outreach with the local people. And next, please. And just to give you an example, 12 years ago, we considered the agro-industry as a kind of enemy of the sustainable use of this area. But with the time, we include this agroforestry in all these talks and agreements, and we signed it with the Minister of the Environment, an agreement, conservation measuring for 200,000 hectares with all these cattle ranchers, foresters, fishermen along the river. So now, for example, we have a management plan for the Ramsar site, and we are implementing different actions. And also the government has a kind of management for the river basin. And we are trying to put together these tools for managing along the river. Next one. And well, this is the results of so many institutions working together. And this is an example. We cannot do alone. We need to create these links and try to promote the citizens, governance of citizens. Well, I can talk more about the beta, but I think my time is finishing. So maybe during the Q&A, I can answer some of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. So inspiring, along with the other case studies. I'm feeling myself really inspired by everything we've heard today. So we're now going to transition to our Q&A for the remainder of our time. And I know we've got some great questions coming in. Please continue to ask those questions. But I would like to start with a question principally for our case study panelists. And any of you are welcome to answer, any and all of you are welcome to answer this question, which is, how have your efforts to conserve rivers, lakes, or wetlands been successful so far? So you've addressed that already in large part, but I'd love to hear if there's anything additional that you would want to highlight that you weren't able to share already. And please, I just go off mute and jump in, and I will recognize you. I'm not sure. I can't tell if any of you is trying to go off mute or not. Ulrika, are you off mute?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you. Thanks, Robin, and thanks for that question. Yeah, maybe just to add from the case of the declaration of the Vjosa River as a national park. I mean, it's really about the partnership. And of course, the local communities have been really instrumental in working towards this for over a decade, and very successful also together with NGOs, together with IUCN to prevent the construction of a large hydropower dam on the river. But in terms of what has made it successful is really the partnership between private sector, NGOs, international organizations, and the government.
Great, thank you so much for that answer. Would any of our other panelists like to? Yes, Fernando, please go ahead.
I think for many years, the conservation of rivers have been neglected. The rivers have been invisible, and the situation of rivers are very bad in general, but we need these hub spots of rivers where the people are working together and are changing the narrative of the conservation of the rivers. So in the beta rivers, I think we could afford to put in the table all the different visions. We at first, we thought that the agro-industry, the farmers were the enemy. And no, they are part of the solution. So they need to put together. For example, they were planting eucalypts and pines for the wood. And finally, they decided that it will be better to keep the native forest and to sell carbon bonds. So they stopped to logging for 30 years. They are going to stop for 30 years the logging, and they are changing these eucalypts and pines for native trees for a carbon bond. So we need to change our way to think, and we need to put together these antagonists that we believe we cannot do anything with them, and try to bring to the solutions. I think it's the only way. We cannot just sit environmental people talking about how important is the environment if we don't take these other actors into the table.
Yep, thank you so much for that answer. Yes, Fridolin.
Thank you. Just to provide a kind of historical background of what we do, the Nature Conservancy has been working on the Tanzania side of the lake for over a decade. right? But for the first time in a long time, we were able to advance realistically and concretely community-led freshwater protection in area that does not interface with terrestrial protected area. I think what made it successful is community attitudes, because the fish stock is declining, and we are working in communities that have been depending on those resources for years, for generations. So when we went there, they said, hey, we just want to be supported. We know that we want to set fish breeding sites. We know that we need to enforce or to establish their restrictions with regard to how fisheries in our area is done. And what we did was basically to support, get legal recognition of the efforts that they were undertaking at local level to be recognized across different levels in the national regulatory frameworks.
Super, thank you so much for that response. And I see we've got a lot of questions coming in now, which is fantastic. Again, we'll get to as many of them as we can, and we'll also try to answer some in writing. So this is a question, I think this question came in, Ulrika, during your presentation, but maybe others might have responses as well. The question was, what criteria should be considered when proposing a protected inland waters area based on the rights of nature, particularly in regions affected by mining and characterized by weak governance? Okay, there's a lot in that question there. So I would invite any of you who would like to address that to just raise your hand. But Ulrika, you have right of first refusal if you'd like to start.
If anyone wants to go ahead, please. I'll have a think about
Okay.
the complex question.
It is a complex question. Fernando, yes.
Yes, it is a very complex question, and I will tell a story. When I was trying to protect river dolphins for so many years, the politicians asked me, okay, we cannot protect the whole river. What will be the best area to protect river dolphins? And then we realized that we need to incorporate biodiversity, key species. And we were discussing this a lot with Michelle in so many meetings about the large catfish moving more than 6,000 kilometers in the Amazon, and river dolphins and turtles. And we started a program to tag river dolphins with satellite tagging. And then we realized what will be the most important areas for feeding, for nursery, and we identified these areas. And we push the governments to create the Ramsar sites located in this hotspot of aquatic biodiversity. But also, we need to consider the human dimension. What is happening with the local communities, where there are the fisheries, where they rely. So we need to combine different layers. Biodiversity, the human dimension, the economics, the politics, the borders, and put together all this and try to suggest a specific area, a stretch of a river or a lake that will be important to concern. It's not simple, it's not easy, but basically we are creating islands of a hub of biodiversity to move to other these areas that are several damage or with a lot of intervention. So in any country have to be different, but the important thing is to consider all the scales and all the actors and also the biodiversity. We need to show the people and the cities that the rivers are plenty of life. They are not invisible, they are underwater. Sometimes they are in murky waters and they don't can sit like in the oceans, but there are so many lives there. So that's important to keep the biodiversity as a criteria for the people and the people that take decisions.
Super, thanks for that response. Would anyone else like to respond to that question?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. In the case of the Vjosa River in Albania, we had the fantastic opportunity there to protect the whole length of the river, and we are losing free-flowing rivers very quickly. There are very few left in the world, especially large scale, and in Europe. This is very unique to have a free-flowing river left. So in this case, it was a fantastic opportunity, really, to be able to protect the whole length of a free-flowing river. And I think this is a focus that we should try to have, to at least in every country have one free-flowing river that we protect. But in terms of upscaling, I think we also need to use all the different kinds of protection and conservation mechanisms that we have. Protected areas, OECMs, protection of flows, and connectivity conservation, all these different mechanisms to create a kind of mosaic of different mechanisms, and to ensure specifically the connectivity that is really important. You can have that pearl band or mosaic of different protection and conservation in a catchment, but the important is to really ensure the connectivity between these. So I would say that's a point to think about.
Yeah, fantastic. And since you mentioned OECMs, and we heard mention of them previously, we do have a question specific to the beta about what the OECM process looked like for the beta, or the OMEC process, or however we like to do our acronyms. And I think we might also, I don't know, Fridolin, if you would like to share anything about the process around OECMs in Tanzania as well. So whoever would like to start. Go ahead, Fridolin.
Thank you. So we, in Tanzania, we are just getting started. We recognize that the national framework does allow for recognition of community protected and conserved areas under OECM status. And what we are trying to do is to create an alignment between what communities look for and what the government look for, because most of the time there are competing interests that you need to consider when you want to go through that process. And working in an ecosystem like Lake Tanganyika that is shared between 4 countries, you need to make sure that you start somewhere, but the framework that you follow is recognized at regional level. That's why we are working with the Lake Tanganyika Authority, which is an intergovernmental organization mandated by the 4 governments to coordinate and oversee the process of protection and management, sustainable management of resources of Lake Tanganyika, to ensure that we have clear, harmonized way of doing that, because we want what we do in Tanzania to inform what happens on the Zambian side and on the DRC side. And if I go back on the previous question, it's very difficult to advance, biodiversity protection in area where there is weak governance or weak institutional governance, like DRC. It's really tough to work there to advance protection, because today the institutions or the people that you are working with, you are not sure whether after 2 years, the frameworks that you are building upon are going to remain the same. So we are just getting started with a national framework that allows for that process on the Tanzanian side, and what happens along the way will inform what we do in other countries.
Thank you. Yeah, really good points, especially around transboundary system management and conservation. Fernando, oops, we just lost him, I think. He did share with us that he's in the Amazon right now and might have some connectivity issues. So hopefully he'll be able to rejoin us shortly. Let's move on to another question from our Q&A portion of the Zoom. So here's a question for anyone who's currently on the screen. Could you highlight what key factors should be considered when establishing a protected inland waters area to ensure long-term ecological integrity and community engagement. So Ulrika already talked about connectivity as one really important part of that ecological integrity, but I'd be interested to hear if anyone else would like to contribute an answer to that question.
I can start, Robin. So I think it goes back to those 4 key questions that I teed up around, you know, what are you trying to protect in the protected and conserved area? What are the threats to it? And then looking across the 5 components of ecological health for inland waters. So obviously connectivity is critical, the species composition, the physical habitat, water quality, and any other disturbances that may be out there affecting the health of the aquatic systems, to look comprehensively across what the threats are for that particular protected and conserved area, and to take that into consideration in the design, designation, and management of the protected area. Kind of general, but I think it's the framing that helps guide where to focus limited resources, because, you know, in protected and conserved area management and design and designation, there's always a limitation on resources. So figuring out what are the things you really need to focus your time and energy on is key.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome back, Fernando. If you're able, we would still be interested to hear from you a little bit about the OECM process in Colombia and specific to the BETA.
Well, basically, we have the national protect areas that are following the technical suggestion of the IUCN, and we have different areas, but the Ramsar sites are more in the head of the Ministry of the Environment and the President, that are the ones that suggest what Ramsar, what wetlands are suitable for this designation. And they send a message to the Ramsar Secretary, and they propose the areas. And to propose the areas, we need to demonstrate the amount of biodiversity in the Ramsar site, and also the governance, because this is very important. And different human activities are allowed in these Ramsar sites, except the mining. The mining is completely banned in all the Ramsar sites. And I think we try to validate and to follow some criteria of the IUCN, especially for the management plans, because we need to produce a zoning designation for the whole area. So we need to recognize that there are some human activities there, economic activities. So we try to produce maps with different criteria, areas of use, areas of not going, economic alternatives, and areas for conservation and restoration. And this is the things we are trying to do with the Ramsar sites, basically.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for just maybe one more question before we wrap things up here. So we have a number of questions in the Q&A related to local communities. And I'm going to maybe ask a 2-part question, and you can choose how you'd like to answer. First question was, how can we effectively balance the needs of local communities with the conservation goals of protected and conserved areas to ensure sustainable management of inland water ecosystems and biodiversity? And the second question is, can you give us specific mechanisms and programs for economic returns to the community and stakeholders in your conservation projects? So if any of you would like to answer one or both parts of that, and we'll just be mindful that we are nearing the end of our time, so I'd love to hear from as many of you as possible. Yes, go ahead, Freeland.
Yeah, I felt like the question was direct to me. You really need to let communities decide what they want. What do they want to conserve, and why do they want to do that? Because we've seen that working in areas where the freshwater ecosystem is interacting with communities' livelihoods, if you just want to go and advance protection the same way you advance protection in terrestrial protected areas, you are set for failure. First, co-create with communities. That's first. And don't try to influence communities, learn from them and guide them properly with regard to what the national framework says. Most of them, they know what they want and how they want that, but they have less knowledge about the setup of the legal and regulatory framework that govern the community protected and conserved areas. As an example of returns that community have got in all the areas that where we are working with that model, communities have said, hey, we don't want people who are not sacrificing as much as we are for conserving this area to enjoy the same economic benefits as we are. So they have they are put in the management plans provision that say, if you are from outside the village, if you want to fish in this specific area outside, in area that is under community management, you will have to pay a certain access fee. And that fee goes back to supporting conservation operations. And we are really working with them and local government to see how we can optimize those revenue streams to build sustainable finance of conservation outcomes in areas where we are working. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really interesting model there. Yes, Fernando.
Well, I think it's very important to value the local knowledge, but also it's important to recognize that there are some bad practices. So the overfishing is not an option. In the Vita River, for example, the indigenous used to have a practice where they put fire in the grassland to capture and to hunting animals. But the impact to do that is huge. So we cannot preserve this kind of behaviors. And we need to bring this, the indigenous and the other people that are doing bad practices, to think about long term and to see that they can do better. They can improve the activities they are doing. So we need to build these approaches with local knowledge, with scientific knowledge, and with management. And this is very important to recognize. Sometimes we say, okay, leave the people do what they want to do, but depend. We need to evaluate this carefully. Now, for example, the Vita is in a very sensitive area of climate change. TNC have produced some models where we can expect that in 30 years, we can lose 50% of the volume of the rivers. So that's a problem. So it's different 100 years ago with a few people, and now with more people, more pressure, and these climatic scenarios that are very dramatic. So it's very urgently to build new tools for the conservation of rivers and the conservation of the island waters. We need to work together and to produce together. It's not simple, but we need to do.
Thank you. Ulrika, would you like to say a few words, and then we'll be wrapping up?
Yeah, thank you, Robin, and thanks for this question. So, in the Vjosa catchment, we have a situation of depopulation. So a lot of young people are moving away from the area. They are moving to the cities to find different economical opportunities, and this is a problem because we need people in the catchment. I mean, we need those stewards, we need those champions, we need those people there to be proud of their system and protect the river. So what we are trying to do is to find sustainable livelihoods and economical opportunities for young people to feel that they have a viable life to stay in the Vjosa catchment. One of the ways we are working with local communities is through community tourism and sustainable tourism. But there are, of course, also other economical opportunities. But so it's a little bit of a maybe different situation. here we really we want to keep the area from being depopulated, and especially to attract young people from the region to stay and to care for the area.
Yeah, thank you. That's just a great reminder, right? That every situation, every context is maybe going to look different, and that we need to be adjusting and modifying our approaches to that particular situation. Fantastic. This has been an amazing webinar. Thank you to all of our speakers for your contributions, for your thoughtful replies. I know I learned a lot, and I'm hoping that everyone else on the call did as well, that we achieved our objective of raising your understanding of how protected and conserved areas can support inland water biodiversity and associated social values. We know that many of you will want to know more. We hope that many of you will want to know more. So we do encourage you to explore the WCPA technical report. We have a QR code there on the screen for you, and we've had the link in the chat, I believe. So please go ahead and explore that report. I just want to thank everyone once again thank to our speakers. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much.